What's going on, Packers fans? Welcome in to an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You, of course, can find the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast 365 days a year. Wherever you get your favorite podcasts, we've got you guys covered every single day. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, give those 5-star reviews. Those subscriptions really help us a ton. These are the days where it is so insanely fun to be a Packers fan. Yes, because, Micah Parsons is a Green Bay Packer. That makes it insanely fun right now, but the season is just around the corner. You're expecting a big season from Green Bay, and the season is, we're on the precipice of a new season, and there's just a lot of excitement in the air. The fall air is already in Green Bay. It feels like early October, late September morning already every single day right now, which has been crazy, but it's football weather. It's here. We've made it. And before you know it, again, we're going to be talking about what happened in the Packers-Lions game coming up next Sunday. So buckle in. It's going to be one hell of a season. If these last few days and last 48 hours are any indication, buckle the hell up, because this has the ability to be one of those really fun and epic seasons. Fingers crossed it actually goes that way. Shout out to our brand new Pack-A-Day Podcast members. I would read them to you like we usually do. We've had over 100 new members over the course of the last 24 hours, 48 hours, right in that range. I cannot thank you guys enough for that. Thank you for signing up and finding value here with us at Pack-A-Day. I'm going to shout out our new All-Pro and Hall of Fame members. If I read everyone, would spend the entire episode on it, right? But Hayden Radomski, Devin Lane, Gons USA, and Alexander Newell. Thank you guys so much for signing up to be Hall of Fame or All-Pro members. If you guys haven't checked out those memberships yet, make sure to do so. We're going to have so much members content. Ross Uglam's going to have stuff. Aaron Nagler and I doing a weekly episode, weekly members Q&A. Guys, the stuff you're about to get, the guests, we're going to have all of it. If you haven't heard yet, a new weekly live show with Mike Wall and I every single Monday. That's not members content. That's going to be for everyone. It's just going to be chock full. Just as you've seen, like what I've done the last 48 hours with going live and doing stuff. It's going to be a really epic year here at Pack-A-Day as well. And just a unbelievable lineup of guests that I am so incredibly excited for. Also want to shout out our two massive partners that I cannot say enough positive things about. I finally got my Luigi's Victory Pizza for the Micah Parsons trade. Had it, devoured it on Friday, like I mentioned on one of the live shows. My plan was to split it with the kids. I ate all but one piece, and I have no regrets whatsoever. It was delicious as usual. Check them out over at luigispizza.com and on social media at Luigi's Pizza. I went with an ultra thin crust. Try them all. The Big Daddy, the obviously the fresh dough, the ultra thin crust. All of them are beyond incredible. Also, Habish and Rotier. Check them out over at habish.com. We're going to be doing injury reports for Habish all season long, the pregame and the postgame, letting you know which players are injured, and then in the game. Hopefully, we don't have too many players injured this year, but if there are, we're going to cover that. And Habish is going to be helping us and partnering with us along the way there. This week we don't have an injury report, so I could have just been like, "Hey, no injury report this week." I want to shout them out. They're awesome to work with. Find them on habish.com. You can call them 800-2HABISH. And to me, the thing that I love is they're real Wisconsin people. They love the Packers. When you call them, you're going to speak to a lawyer directly. And it's just a really great company to work with that is local, down to earth, organic. You probably don't know a injury attorney until you need to have one. And when you need to have one, you're like, who should I go to? I've got you covered. Habish.com. Go to Habish or Rotier. National reputation, hometown service, and make sure you tell them either Andy or Pack-A-Day sent you as well. All right, let's get into our main topic for today, and that is obviously going to be all surrounding around Micah Parsons. I want to go over his press conference and contract first, and then once that's done, I want to get into how this happened. I'm still befuddled. It's been a whirlwind. It hasn't quite completely sunk in to all of my being yet that Micah Parsons is a Green Bay Packer. I'm still not all the way there. It still doesn't feel real. Yeah, I woke up this morning and I'm like, all right, that did actually happen. Like, it's a really crazy situation where you've seen it. You saw the tweets come in for me and Rappaport and Adam Schefter and everyone else. And you're like, okay, and you're double checking it, triple checking it. Oh my God, like this is actually real. He passed the physical. The contract is signed. He did the press conference. And before you know it, he's going to be out there on the field. And I think that first sack, those first big plays from him is really going to be where it like entirely sinks in of like, oh my God, he's here. This is it. It's legit. But I wanted to go over today how this could even come to pass. How is he a Green Bay Packer? You have to have the exact perfect storm, the perfect conditions for something like this to take place. We'll go over what transpired to get Micah Parsons to be a member of the Green Bay Packers and what those conditions were to see that actually come to fruition. But before we get there, did have the opportunity, obviously, to hear from Micah Parsons, Brian Gutekunst, and Matt LaFleur as well. I was there in the auditorium. Really cool experience just to kind of see Micah for the first time as a member of the Green Bay Packers. The first thing I'll say about Micah, you could just tell he's incredibly authentic, wears his emotions on his sleeve. He even said it at one point. He's like, sometimes I probably say some stuff that I shouldn't. I'm real. I'm authentic. Like, and it felt that way. It didn't feel like it was just, I'm going to say I'm authentic, but I'm not. It really legitimately felt like he's going to tell it how it is, and he's going to say what is on his mind. Maybe that it does, have some other sides of it as well, meaning maybe there can be some downsides to that. But to me, it came across as real and organic, and I love that every single time. By the way, the big thing here, he chose jersey number 1. Jersey number 1. I did not think that was going to be an option on the table. The last person that wore number 1 was Curly Lambeau. Nobody has been given that number. I can certainly understand if you're going to make an exception. It's a pretty good one to make an exception for. I talked about this on the live show. I think I'm just kind of over, retired jersey numbers. There's only so many numbers. You have a 90-man roster. Like, I think I'm just kind of good. Like, find a way to honor it rather than retire it. Use it on players like Micah Parsons or whatever. Like, I think the right players should be able to be given some of those numbers. I like somebody posted in chat of like, maybe it comes with a patch. Like, could there be like some sort of Curly Lambeau patch on the jersey for the person who wears number 1? And by the way, the stadium's sort of named after the guy. His name's on the facade. Like, there's no disrespect here to Curly Lambeau, in my opinion. And I just think, and by the way, also, Curly Lambeau's number 1 is technically not retired. It is not actually a retired number. So it hasn't been given out. If nothing else, like, take it out of that weird no man's land. Is it retired or it's not? It's not. All right. Then Micah Parsons is taking it, and I'm 100% cool with that. I like the number choice. I thought number 11 would have been best. Maybe Jaden Reed going back to number 1. Because that's what he wore in college. I would have been cool with that also, but no issues with number 1. That's a good, clean fit. And I'm excited to see him don that number 1 in that first game against Detroit. No say where he was going to end up, according to Micah Parsons. He did not have any autonomy over it whatsoever. I think I probably believe that for the most part. If there was a place where he didn't really want to go, he would have easily, he doesn't have a no trade clause, but he just could have said like, well, you just tell him I'm not signing a contract extension there. And that ends the negotiations right there. And I think this is worth pointing out. If Micah did not want to be a Green Bay Packer, he had control over that. No question about it. Because here's how this negotiation would work, right? And from this standpoint, Jerry Jones and the Cowboys decide that they want to trade Micah Parsons away. They talk to the rest of the league, see what teams are interested, and they say, we've got a deal with Green Bay. We've got a deal set. We just need you to work out the parameters of a contract with them, and then we're good to go. And Micah says, yeah, I'm not going to Green Bay. No interest. Sorry, find a different team. And you might just say, that doesn't matter. The Cowboys can do it. He has a no trade clause. They can still ship him no matter what. It doesn't matter what Micah Parsons thinks. It does to Green Bay. Without a sign, sealed, deliver contract that was already agreed upon, they don't do that deal. They're not going to take him on a 1 year and then do the franchise thing or anything like that. The requirement for the Green Bay Packers to make this deal also is that they have Micah Parsons under contract. The requirement for Micah is that he wants that contract as well. But the Green Bay Packers do not go into this deal on a 1 year lame duck year. And especially if he's saying, I'm not going to be there, it's just a non-starter at that point. So while he doesn't have a no trade clause, he has a no trade clause. Any team that's acquiring him is going to want to enter into a long-term deal. And if he just plays hardball and says, no, I'm not signing a long-term deal with that team, Green Bay, unfortunately, in that situation would just have to say, all right, we're out. And so in effect, he has a no trade clause. So I don't know it maybe just never got to that point where he felt he needed to, hear his agent to exercise that power. If he was open to going Green Bay, there's no need to kind of get involved in that. But he certainly could have had a little bit more say. But according to him, he did not have any say where he ended up. He just kind of let everything play out. He said physically he's doing great. It does seem like there is a lot of hope that he is going to be able to play against Detroit. Micah Parsons said that, they didn't, trade for him to not be out there. And, Goody said in some way, shape, or form, I don't think he's going to be full. I don't think you're looking at a full 60, 70 snaps in that game, nor do I want that. There should be a ramp up period. Set him as a designated pass rusher. You still have LVN, Rashawn Gary, Kingsley Nigbari, amongst others that you can put out there as your primary guys. Use him in smart situations and let him go wreak havoc when those situations come up. But I want to see a ramp up period, especially with you've got a Thursday game right after it. Too much, too fast, and I get a little bit nervous after all this time off for Micah. The last thing you want is an early season injury that lingers into the season or anything like that. You got to be smart with him. I would love to see him out there as well, but be smart with his overall snap count. But again, it does sound like he is going to be set to play in some capacity against Detroit. He said winning is everything to him. Brian Gutekunst did detail the trade a little bit. One of the things that I asked him, which I think is just kind of like an interesting inside baseball thing, and I'm always very interested to see how these things come to pass. Jerry Jones in his press conference the other day said that Kenny Clark practiced on, Thursday. And if you remember, there was a big, that was going to be like the scrimmage day. Like they were doing some, big time intense periods and having like a big time, competitive day of practice. And that was the first thing my mind went to is how did Green Bay handle that? Because they had the parameters of the deal in place. Like that practice was a mere hours before the trade was finalized. This would have been the most Green Bay Packers thing ever if the Packers had a deal in place for Micah Parsons to come to Green Bay, 2 firsts in Kenny Clark, and Kenny Clark gets injured a couple hours in practice, right before the trade is set to happen in that practice. I think it's kind of shocking that they let him practice. Now, Goody did with a wry smile say, you may have been a little limited in that practice. So they clearly took it easy with him. It's a tough situation because Goody also detailed it, I thought really, really well. He's like, where we were at with Micah Parsons, he's like, you guys don't know this, but we've had situations like this on numerous occasions for players that you guys never even caught wind of, where trade details were finalized, contracts were discussed, and then nothing comes of it. The team decides to keep the player, or maybe he gets traded to another team, and it's just much ado about nothing. And so, Brian basically had to treat it as like, yeah, we're hopeful this is going to happen, but we can't just like live our lives as if we're just waiting for this deal. We got to continue full speed ahead. We got Detroit coming up, and Kenny needs to be out there practicing. And Brian also said like he felt like he couldn't be, you can't be scared with this stuff. You have to just kind of let it play out. And he said like they didn't want to live that way of just being like, well, what if he gets hurt or whatever. So Kenny went out and practiced. Again, it sounds like maybe somewhat limited in that practice, but he goes out and practices. Thankfully, there's no injury. And then the trade is consummated later that day. And then they take the physicals. The physicals are now done and the trade is completed. But I thought that was a really interesting dynamic. And why that's so interesting, and maybe then this again is just me nerding out about it, but why it's so interesting to me is if they did do something, even like the limited stuff, that clearly came from Green Bay. I wonder if Kenny had an inkling of like, well, that's kind of weird. Why am I limited for this practice? I feel good. Maybe they just came to him and said, hey, we want you to kind of have a little bit more of a vet rest day today. We're just going to have you go through individuals. And maybe that wouldn't have been weird for Kenny at this stage of his career. That's kind of my guess if I had to hypothesize as to how that conversation went. But if all of a sudden you go down and you're like, hey, I'm sorry, we can't have you practice today, that has a weird connotation. I guess they probably could have just said, hey, for Kenny, we want to give you a vet rest day. You've earned it. We want to just be really cautious. You're, one of the more established veterans on this team. But it's just it's interesting. And can you imagine? Can you imagine if he got hurt in that practice? Because Jerry Jones went on about how they really wanted a high performing defensive tackle. That Kenny Clark was kind of a deal breaker in this. That they had him in mind. If Clark goes down hurt, they probably don't get Micah Parsons. Even if he's hurt for like a month, even if it's something minor or even a few weeks, they probably don't get Micah Parsons. It's a really interesting dynamic. And thankfully, Kenny stayed healthy in that practice, and you were ultimately able to get Micah Parsons still. Goody said he learned from the Khalil Mack deal. He said that he recognized that with the Khalil Mack deal, they may have got in that trade conversation a little bit late. He said he didn't think it would have ultimately affected the outcome one way or the other, but he understood the significance of really, if you want to go get a player, you need to be in those conversations from the beginning. And he said he was very, very, very early on with this. He kind of made a couple, he didn't want to get too much in the details, but he's like, we were very early. We were very early in those conversations. So I think this is also an important piece. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on all of this, but to me, it's all just very interesting. I don't think people always recognize that just like a player in their first couple of years where they're learning on the job, general manager is that way too. It really, really is. There were a couple bad draft classes in there from Goody. There's no question about it. He's learned from those draft classes. He's learned from his mistakes, and he's been much better at it. He learned that, hey, in situations where you want to go get a Khalil Mack, or in this case, a Micah Parsons, you need to be involved in those conversations right away. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you have to go through the process in order to become a better general manager. And I think that sometimes gets lost. It's the same thing for a head coach. It's really, really difficult. You're learning on the job as you go through this stuff. And I think there were things that Goody definitely learned. And I think this was one of them where, hey, you have to be involved in these conversations right away. With Micah Parsons, he was, and it sounds like he certainly learned from that Khalil Mack situation. Said he had a lot of confidence in the defensive tackle room. I asked him directly, is that something where you might need to go and acquire a player, or are you good? And he said that he wants to let these guys play it out. A lot of confidence in that room. Spoke about Wyatt, Wooden, the two rookies, Stackhouse and Brinson, Carl Brooks. There seems to be, from Matt, Jeff, who's talked about it previously, and Goody, a lot of confidence in those 5 defensive tackles. We'll see if that pays off for them. We'll see how those guys play. But there is no shortage of belief in that building for those 5 defensive tackles. Matt LaFleur said that one of his first impressions of Micah Parsons was at the Pro Bowl, and Micah was just going all out. And he's like, it was noticeable. Everyone else is just kind of going through the motions, and Micah's just going full bore every single rep. And Micah talked about that a little bit later. He's like, all I know is go. That's all he knows. He's like, if you're not that way, if that's not how you're doing it, he's like, we're probably not going to be friends. Again, I loved his attitude towards everything. Everyone, and I mean everyone, extremely complimentary of Kenny Clark. Goody opened the press conference by going on for, I don't know, a few minutes at least, talking about and thanking Kenny Clark for all of his contributions. Said the phone call was incredibly difficult that he had with Kenny, or the conversation. I don't know if it was phone call, conversation, I'll put it that way. And then, Matt LaFleur spoke about it, how bittersweet the entire process was. And even Micah Parsons, talked about the importance of Kenny Clark, that he's not coming in to try to replace Kenny or anything like that. So that was a very noticeable, is just how much respect and reverence everyone had for Kenny Clark on his way out as he heads to Dallas. Kenny, by the way, seems very happy in Dallas, consummate professional, it would seem, which is exactly what you would expect. That's just Kenny Clark in a nutshell. He did mention, this is Brian Gutekunst, that Ed Policy was very supportive, not super involved, obviously signed off on it. He kept him engaged because this was such a huge deal for the Packers, but it did not sound like there was any meddling in Brian Gutekunst's business from Ed Policy. And then I also asked Matt about, how he feels about Micah as a run defender, because that was Jerry Jones's big thing of, well, we need run defenders. We need run defenders. And Matt just gave a smile and he said either very good or very confident, something to that extent, but felt very good about Micah Parsons, the run defender, and he has every right to. He's still a very good run defender. Maybe not upper echelon run defender, but there's not a bad run defender there in Micah Parsons. So that was kind of the press conferences in a nutshell. I did ask Micah as well. I'm like, he talked about like how he really cares about the NFL and watches the draft, and like he's a football junkie. And I said, yeah, you said you're a football junkie. I'm like, then the value of 2 first-round picks, a premier player, the biggest defensive contract, and et cetera. Like, what type of expectations does that put on you? And he's like, he basically, again, I'm paraphrasing here quite a bit, but like, he's like, trust me, I know the expectations. He's like, it means something to me. I want to go out and prove it. I thought he gave a great answer. Definitely go out and check out those press conferences if you haven't already. But I was very impressed. We know everything about, Micah Parsons, the football player. First impressions aren't everything, but they do, kind of come across a certain way. That first impression, I don't think could have gone really any better for Micah Parsons. As far as the contract goes, a lot of great news on the contract front as well. It ends up as a true 5-year, $210 million contract. If you're doing the back of the napkin math right now, that is $42 million per year. Reported as $47 million. It actually, because of that, 5th-year option that's already on that deal, with that included and how you divide it all out, Green Bay is going to get him 5 years, $42 million. The bigger aspect of this year, he's going to make just under $10 million. Or let me clarify. When I say make, I'm always looking at cap hits. How the money goes into his bank account for me is pretty irrelevant. So let me rephrase it though. His cap hit this year is going to be $10 million, just under $10 million. Next year, just under $20 million. And then the year after that, under $27 million. 3 extremely reasonable years on his contract. And after that, it gets a little bit iffy. That's when you're going to look towards probably doing some extensions and, sort of renegotiating those deals and things like that. But 3 very digestible years. Goody may not believe in windows. He's opened himself a 3-year window with this contract. Not to say that you couldn't do some things down the road or hit on some cheap day 2, day 3 draft picks that open up that window even longer, et cetera. All of those things are always possibilities, but I would say pretty clearly right now, this is a pretty defined 3-year window, 25, 26, 27 for Green Bay. And then you kind of see where things are at after that. There will be consequences down the road with year 4 and 5 of this deal and some of the roster gymnastics and salary cap gymnastics that you're going to have to do after that. But just know, and Goody even brought it up too, this is going to give them flexibility over the course of the next couple of years because of how this contract is set up. So 5 years, $210 million, $42 million per year with cap hits of $10 million, $19 million, $27 million over the course of the next 3 seasons. Let's really dive into this. Micah Parsons is a Green Bay Packer. How is this possible? Why was Green Bay able to make this deal? And what were the conditions that were needed in order for this to be the perfect storm that Micah Parsons ends up in Green Bay as a member of the Packers? There's some easy, obvious things that I want to go over, but we're going to really dig into this because a lot of these things needed to be set in place in order for this to actually be the end result where he's in Green Bay. The first one is obvious, but it's worth going over anyway. The player has to be available. You don't just go and say, hey, what do you want for Patrick Mahomes? It's like they're just going to call him like, yeah, sorry, no, thank you. We're not interested. And the player actually has to become available in some real significant way. For Dallas, the contract negotiations that fell apart, them not being on the same page, that's a huge piece of this. Without that, if the deal just gets done in April, this is all a non-starter. You can't trade for Micah Parsons. If that negotiation between the Cowboys and Parsons goes better, it's a complete non-starter. And if Jerry Jones just is any other normal person in this business and actually just works with the agent, how you're supposed to by the NFL Players Association agreement, the collective bargaining agreement, this probably may end up a non-starter as well. But Jerry Jones is on his own island. He does his own thing. He wanted to do this his way. I think he probably at some point felt disrespected and things broke down in their entirety. And without that, Micah Parsons never becomes a Green Bay Packer. This never even becomes an opportunity for Green Bay. So there has to be a willingness for Dallas to trade Parsons. They also have to be willing to trade him within the NFC. Some organizations may say, we're going to trade him, but we're going to trade him to the opposite conference. I talked about this on a live chat. This is the one thing. Everything else that Jerry said in his press conference was beyond a leap too far, that they're going to be better now because of having Kenny without Micah Parsons, that it was unanimous within the organization. Like All these things they're just too far out there, right? That like run defense was this big thing that there's so many things. The one thing I agree with is you can easily trade somebody in the conference. Maybe division, you want to be a little bit more careful. But how I view it is if I were a GM, I'm not concerned where the other 31 teams are as much. My concern is I need us to be the best team. Wherever, if Green Bay ends up being the second best team because of this Micah Parsons deal, that's a little bit of a bummer that they're in the NFC. But my job, my focus is making us the best team. And if we're the best team, then nothing else matters. We're going to go out and have a real shot to win a Super Bowl. And I know that we've put the best roster together possible. So that's my job. My job is to simply put the best roster together. And if I have to do that by trading Micah Parsons within the same conference, so be it. Good luck to Micah Parsons in Green Bay. We'll probably see in the playoffs down the road. But my job is to get this set and be the best team possible. And if that includes, again, having to trade a player to the NFC and you're in the NFC, to me, it's much ado about nothing. It's not a huge deal. That's the one thing I agree with him on. But it had to be a team that was willing to do that inside the NFC. Another piece of this from Dallas's point of view is it had to get to this point now. If this is a situation where Jerry Jones opened it up to the highest bidder before the draft, I don't know if Green Bay ends up the highest bidder in that scenario. Most teams have spent their money in free agency. They have obviously used their draft picks from the 2025 NFL draft. Some teams have already traded away draft capital in 2026. Not every team was capable of pulling something like this off. And if it was earlier in the year in April, there would have been a lot more teams in that conversation. And it would have maybe gone higher and higher on the price for it because more teams were bidding on him. And there could have come a point where Goody's just like, that's too much. We can't do it. So the fact that this went into a week before the season started was, I think, really beneficial for Green Bay. Whereas I think there would have been a lot more suitors with a lot more capital out there to go get Micah Parsons if this deal happened in April. And instead, Green Bay was one of the lucky ones that really benefited because they were in a situation where they were probably one of the few teams that could actually really pull this off in a significant way still. So the timing was right. The next thing that needed to happen, and we're going to go back in time, when Green Bay traded away Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, I'm sure some of you will remember this. I talked about at length 2025. 2025, 2025, 2025. I said, that's the year. You're going to end up in this unique situation because you got all these extra draft picks for Aaron and Davante. Remember the extra first, the extra seconds, and all that sort of stuff. There was a lot of capital there that you were able to acquire more young, talented assets because of those two deals. And when you traded those players away and got those draft assets in return, you looked at 2025 and said, a lot of those draft assets are going to be in year 3, year 4 of their careers and just entering the prime, but not hitting big salaries yet. Guys like Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, and that entire Rasheed Walker, Zach Tom. I know Zach Tom signed his contract extension, but Sean Ryan, like all of these players and from that draft class, and then the Tucker Crafts, the Luke Musgraves, the Jaden Reeds, the Carl Brookses, we can go on and on, Dontavian Wicks. They have not reached the point yet where you need to give all of them huge contracts. They're all on cheap rookie deals other than Zach Tom, who you made an exception for to get that deal done sooner rather than later because he's such an important piece of the team. All of those young up-and-coming players that you were going to get with all that extra draft capital, this is the year that you have them still really, really cheap. Not to mention a lot of the dead cap hits, not all of them, but a lot of the dead cap hits from some of those players that you needed to move on from, including Davante Adams and, specifically Aaron Rodgers was the big one. Those are gone in 2025. And then you also look at the fact that, again, this was going to be a year where you had those young players progressing at the right moment, likely a lot of salary cap space, and, a full another draft class. 2025 was always the point where the arrow was pointing to. So when you moved on from Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams and got those extra pieces of draft capital and you got all those young assets, there was always this real window, whether Goody likes it or not, in 2025 to open something pretty aggressively. And so this is where you ended up with it. And there was also why, by the way, I think there was a real legitimate feeling in Packers Nation, and I understood it at the time because there just wasn't much available that you could do. But you looked at 2025 as the year that you were going to go, and really be able to do some spending and really maybe be able to do something that accelerated this team to the next level. It was like they went out and got Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs, two good players, but you just felt a little bit underwhelmed. Not again, it doesn't mean to be disrespectful to either of those players, but you just got Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney the previous, off season, and you're thinking, he's done Zadarius Smith before. We've seen the Charles Woodson thing, the Reggie White thing. You're expecting some major move, and you get Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs, two good players. And you're like, oh, that's going to help, but you just maybe were hoping for a little bit more. Well, Goody had an idea still up his sleeve, and now you've got Micah Parsons, and now this whole plan of what could happen in 2025 really goes into motion in a significant way, where you've got this draft class with Matthew Golden taken in the first round. You've got Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs joining in. You've got Micah Parsons coming in at just the right time, and you didn't lose anything. You lost TJ Slayton, Eric Stokes. It's not nothing. I guess Kenny Clark is part of the deal, but because you had the right foundation already set, that is what allowed this to happen. And going back to those Rodgers and Devontae deals, this was always the timeline that set up perfectly for 2025. Another piece of this that helped, which is going to sound weird, but the 2021 draft class just being awful, just awful. Eric Stokes, Josh Myers, Amari Rodgers, Royce Newman, TJ Slayton, Shamar Jean-Charles, Cole Van Lannon, Isaiah McDuffie, and Kylan Hill. If that draft class is really good, you have to pay Eric Stokes and Josh Myers and maybe one other player from that class a bunch of money. You probably don't have the money for, Micah Parsons in that situation. Now, maybe what it ends up happening is Stokes and Myers are just great. You pay them, and then maybe you don't have to, pay, Banks and Hobbs, and maybe that's just kind of an apples to apples. But the fact that that draft class was terrible and you're not re-signing any of those players to big contracts other than Isaiah McDuffie on a pretty minimal contract overall, that allows you to do some of these things like Hobbs, like Banks, and a piece of Micah Parsons as well. I think the other thing here that, and again, this is going to sound weird, but Green Bay's inability to draft stars earlier that could have potentially taken all of this money already. Let's just say in, 2020, 2019, there's an additional star or two that they've already drafted. Well, they're giving that Micah Parsons number to the guy that they drafted and developed in-house. They're not giving it to Micah Parsons. So that's a piece of this as well. If they had drafted a couple other players that were on that upper echelon, you're not making this deal. You're going to probably keep those draft picks and the resources because you're going to need them down the road because you've already given some huge contracts out. But because you didn't, you need to kind of go out and maybe add that player to this team. And that's where Micah Parsons enters the conversation. We talked about the new contracts having hit yet other than Zach Tom. That's a piece of this. You also really need to look ahead. When you get to 2026, even starting next year, now they, again, based on the contract that they set up, they'll have some flexibility. But if you got to 2026 and felt like, man, we need to really pay Quay Walker a huge deal, Christian Watson, Sean Ryan, Romeo Doubs, Kingsley Enagbare, Rasheed Walker, we need all those players. We're going to need all the money we can to re-sign them. I think it's the opposite. I think a lot of the young players that have stepped up really make those players potentially expendable. And therefore, that instead of paying a bunch of money to those players, you can spend that money on Micah Parsons. For example, Quay Walker, earlier in camp, it really felt like Quay was probably going to get an extension. Now with Micah in the fold and Tyron Hopper looking really good in preseason, I don't think that's the case. I don't think you need to give Quay Walker a huge contract anymore. Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, they get counterfeit by Savion Williams and Matthew Golden. The expectation now is for those two, and now next year they'll still have Reed and Wicks, and they'll probably draft a couple of other wide receivers because after that they're going to lose, or they could lose Reed and Wicks, right? So they're going to just kind of keep turning the wheel at wide receiver. That probably means that barring something where they just feel like they have to keep those two, or at least they have the ability to move on if they want to, because you're still going to have Reed, Wicks, Savion Williams, and Matthew Golden, and then probably still some other capital that they'll spend at that position. Sean Ryan and Rasheed Walker, those are players that are going to be replaced by Anthony Belton and Jordan Morgan. So the fact that you have some of these pieces already in place, Kingsley Enagbare will be replaced by Baron Sorrell. They've done a great job in already finding future replacements for some of these players, which opens up all that cap space. If you didn't have an Anthony Belton, a Jordan Morgan, a Matthew Golden, maybe a Savion Williams, and some of these players, you're probably having to retain some of those. But because you don't have to, because you've got versions of them at home already on much cheaper deals, it allows you to feel like you can be confident in going out and spending a bunch of money and resources on a Micah Parsons. I'll add in the fact that the Zach Tom contract, I thought, came in under value for Green Bay, in a good way for Green Bay. I've said it a couple times recently. If Zach Tom would have got $5 million more per year on his contract, I would not have thought anything of it. I would have thought he was more than deserving of an extra $5 million per year. Would not have registered with me one iota. I would not have said one thing of like, oh, I think they may have overpaid a little bit. No, $5 million more per year for Zach Tom. And I would have been like, totally understandable. Totally get it. The savings there can be used directly on Micah. You've got, again, a $42 million per year deal when you really look at this. Take that $5 million that you saved on Zach Tom, put it towards that $42 million. It's kind of like a $37 million deal instead. And that, again, feels much more palatable. So again, when you get a deal like Zach Tom's, it allows you to do some other things. If they, had to give Tom more money, you may not have the resources available to do this kind of deal. The next piece of this is that Brian has still been pretty financially conscientious with this version of the team. He hasn't had to borrow money from future years yet. He hasn't restructured a bunch of deals and, used a bunch of void years and things like that to get to this point. So the credit card has not been tapped into yet, and you're going to need it. And it's going to get there very, very soon. They've already started to use void years on this Micah Parsons contract. So that credit card is about to get pulled back out of the wallet, and there's going to be some pretty significant spending on it. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. That means that they are doing everything that they can to put a winning football team together. You should want to see your team do that at some point when you feel like the time is right. The time is right. It's here. It's now. The time is right to get that credit card going. So the fact that they didn't have to do that already, and they were in a financially, just safe situation where they could actually make a move like this, that to me is also why this opportunity presented itself. If they were already so much in debt from future salary caps that they've already borrowed from, there's no way that they would have been able to make a deal like this. But not only was it not just having, not used that credit card yet, the other aspect of this that you really need to keep in mind is that they stayed flexible with their current salary cap. They had 30 plus million in available salary cap space. They had the ability where, and Brian's talked about this in the past, if opportunities present themselves, they want to be able to go and make those moves. If they had 5 million in salary cap space this year, yeah, they probably could have restructured some things to make it happen, but would have been a whole hell of a lot more complicated. The fact that they gave themselves that flexibility to make moves if they wanted to make moves, to go get a Micah Parsons if someone like Micah Parsons became available, is also worth noting. And not many teams do that. A lot of teams do not give themselves that opening and that out to go out and get a key player if a key player does in fact come available. It would have been brutal if Micah Parsons available, you can give up 2 first-round picks and Kenny Clark for him, and you just go to bring on that contract, and you're just like, we can't really make it work. We're just in a salary cap prison where it's too difficult to bring him on, and we have to do too many things to try to make it work that are going to make it too painful. They were flexible with their salary cap space. They kept an open mind with it, and that availability of that space allowed for this deal to sort of happen. I think the willingness to win now, and Brian Gutekunst talking about urgency, I think that really played a factor into it. He talked about it at the beginning of the offseason. I think that was a message to the players primarily. I think it was to the rest of the organization of like, hey, I'm setting the tone right now. We are going to have a sense of urgency, and it is time to start winning Super Bowls. I said it all along. I don't think it was a message of like, hey, we're going to go and do a bunch of crazy stuff this offseason and it's win now or else. I do think the message to the rest of the players and the rest of the organization sort of goes hollow if you don't have that level of urgency. Well, hello, new Brian Gutekunst, spending a huge contract on Aaron Banks, big money on Nate Hobbs, first round pick on a wide receiver, and trading 2 future firsts, Kenny Clark, and a ton of money towards Micah Parsons. If that doesn't spell urgency and that it's time to start winning Super Bowls, I don't know what does. He set the tone. He set the tone at the beginning of the offseason, and he's setting the tone again that it is time right now to win these championships. So that win now mentality, that urgency from Gutekunst, I think that played a part in this. I think Jordan Love only having 10% of his contract only counting about 10% of the salary cap right now. There are quarterbacks out there that are at around 17%. It just opens up a little bit more space. You're not to the point yet where Jordan is taking up 15, 17, 20% of the salary cap. He's at 10. 90% of your salary cap is still available to players not named Jordan Love this season. And that opens up the possibility of going up and getting a Micah Parsons. The youth of the team. You have built a young foundation of young, talented football players that everything is sort of set in place already. This was a team that was expected to compete, even if it was maybe a little bit more on the fringes. This is a team that was expected to compete this year as the youngest team in football for the 3rd consecutive year without Micah Parsons. When you have that, when you've built that foundation, you're the youngest team in football, you've been to the playoffs in back-to-back years. What you have done, and I cannot stress this enough, you have bought yourself the opportunity to go big game hunting, to add that one big piece. Brian said it today in the press conference. Not every team and not in every season would this have made sense for Green Bay. You have to be in the right situation. Brian deserves credit for setting the foundation of this team up where you can go and make a deal like this and it makes sense. Cleveland doing this deal for Micah Parsons would make no sense. I would argue Chicago making this deal right now for Micah Parsons, probably not quite there yet. You're probably not to the point yet where you want to go quite all in that scenario. We could go on and on, but so many teams are probably not to the point where they have the full foundation already built out. Brian did the hard work. He built the foundation. He has the depth. He has the youth. He has the up and coming players. And now you really feel like you're a piece away. And if you feel like that right piece comes along, you have the ability to go do it. But the only reason that you can do it is because you have already set everything in place that you've needed to. And without doing that, the trade doesn't even make sense in the first place. He bought himself and earned himself the opportunity to go out and trade some big time assets and give a big time contract to Micah Parsons. I think Jeff Hafley and his ability to utilize Micah Parsons, it is a match made in heaven. I don't think that that's a deal breaker, but it certainly makes you a lot more excited about it. And again, any little nudge across the finish line to get a deal like this done, anything that springs in the positive certainly helps. The other last couple things is it was the right price. To me, as I talked about, 2 first-round picks was the price to get yourself in the door, to have conversations with the Cowboys. Without 2 first-round picks, you're not even getting in the conversation. So you knew that going in. So Goody was very clearly open to the 2 first-round picks, or he doesn't even pick up the phone in the first place. Everyone knows that. The next thing is that the Cowboys could have easily said, we want young, cheap, talented players. And if you start asking for the wrong ones, like Edgerrin Cooper or something like that, Matthew Golden or whatever it might be, it's just a non-starter. You're just not doing that deal. And had this been 2 firsts, a second, and Evan Williams or something, that price is probably just a little bit too steep. The fact that they asked for a 30-year-old that you were probably going to have to move on from next year anyway because of the salary cap that you're giving to, or the cap space that you're giving to Micah Parsons, that's about as easy of an ask as you could possibly think of in that scenario. Not easy in general. Kenny's a huge loss, don't get me wrong. But from a GM standpoint, that's probably about one of the least painful ones because you probably only had 1 year left of Kenny anyway. So it had to be the right price. And in this case, it was. Anything more exorbitant, any more big demands from Jerry, and it's just a no from Goody. So the price was ultimately right. And then last but not least, Micah Parsons himself. It was the right player at the right time for the right reasons. You could not build a better Goody player profile for a move like this than Micah Parsons. What do we know that Goody loves when going out and getting, whether it's draft picks, free agents, etc.? He loves his insane athletes. His 10.0 relative athletic scores or the 9 or above relative athletic scores. Micah Parsons is one of the freakiest athletes in all of football. Check. How much do we hear every single time of how Brian Gutekunst values versatility? That is something that means the world to them. Well, left defensive end, right defensive end, lined up over center, off ball linebacker, double A gap blitzer, can cover, can blitz, can rush the passer, can do so many different things. I'd be willing to say, yeah, just a little bit checks that box for versatility. Check. We know that he values premium positions. Defensive end, pass rusher, second only to quarterback. Check. Age, 26 years old. If he's 30, I'm not sure he's super interested. I don't. It's certainly not at this price. But he's in the prime of his career. Just like when he went out and got Zadarius Smith. Just like when he went out and got Josh Jacobs. Just like when he went out and got Xavier McKinney. If he's going to sign you to a big free agent deal, you're going to be in the prime of your career. You're not going to be at age 29, 30, 33, anything like that. He values that a ton. Micah Parsons, 26 years old. Check. And it needs to also be a need on your team. And while I think they would have got by maybe to some extent on the defensive line with Rashawn Gary, LVN, Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, we know that this needed to be much more near an elite pass rush unit if they really want to reach the promised land and bring home the Lombardi. And in order to do that, you probably needed a big time piece. They were probably a piece away, and he didn't mess around. It also fit a need. So, insane athlete, versatile, premium position, 26 years old, fit a need. It was the right player at the right time for the right reasons. This is the perfect storm. The player was actually available. Dallas kind of messed things up a little bit. They waited until the time where it was even more feasible for Green Bay. The entire timeline after trading away Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams always set up for 2025 to be a year where you were going to have a lot of flexibility to make an all-in move if you wanted to do that. The lack of any sort of payment needed towards the 2021 draft class and the fact that you have not had to pay a couple other big-time stars opens up this opportunity. The fact that the new contracts haven't hit yet other than for Zach Tom, that your 2026 free agent class may be counterfeit by a lot of young players that are already on this team and that you may not have to give them big contracts, that you have flexibility at this point in time to be able to actually have that money available and go and spend it. That Zach Tom's contract probably saved you a little bit money that you can actually use towards this sort of deal, that you haven't opened up the credit card yet up until this deal was made, that you had Jordan Love only making 10% of the salary cap, that the foundation and the depth is already built for this team so that you can go and make a move like this. And it actually makes sense at this point in time. The win now mentality and the urgency that Goody has put into this team. Jeff Hafley being the perfect coordinator for Micah Parsons. And then last but not least, it was the right price, the right player, the right time, and everything that Goody looks for in a player. It was literally the perfect storm. Everything came together at exactly the right time to make this happen. And that is how Micah Parsons is, in fact, a Green Bay Packer. It still doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like, again, like it's totally set in. But if you're wondering, how does something like this come to fruition? How does Micah Parsons go from one of the best players in the league in one of your, sort of not division rivals, but certainly conference rivals in the Dallas Cowboys, and now Micah Parsons is a Green Bay Packer? You have to have everything go in the right direction. It did. That's what happened. And that's how Micah Parsons ultimately is now wearing number 1 in green and gold and is going to be playing against the Detroit Lions in just over a week. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Shout out to our All-Pro and Hall of Fame members, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Brandon Paletta, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Alex Hwang, Peter Ritaka, Jay Zimmerman, B. Brown, Puerto Rican Packer, Dan Gessfer, Dylan Pat Scott, SoCal Pack, Chris Rager, Izzy Roberts, Ian Ewing, Carlo Delgado, Willie Winkle-Stinkle, Jen Wright, The Gable Storm, Pack Attack Cast, Chris Weish, Craig, John D. Metropolis, Hayden Radomski, Devin Lane, Gons USA, and Alexander Newell. I'll see you guys tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.